Hi there, this is Ron and Cyndi Gula with another episode of the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. Cyndi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Ron?
Good. One of these days, you're going to do the intro.
Oh, okay. Gauntlet has been laid down.
That's right. That's right. All right. Today we are here with our guest, Chris Kubecka. Chris, how are you?
Great.
Just great.
Well, it's Cinco de Mayo,
It
so
is.
I'm like
somewhat festive.
right, looking forward to some margaritas, maybe some cigars, some Mexican food. Yeah. I'm
All that
excited.
on the Gula Tech Cyber Margarita
Fiction.
Festive May the 5th, 4th be with you
Cinco.
show. Yes, 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 yes.
Let's get all of that in.
So today we're very lucky because you're here in the States. Normally, I wrote down Belgium, but you live in the Netherlands.
Yes, it's kind of similar to Belgium, but a smaller country with much worse food than Belgium.
Much worse food. That's
Yeah.
That's why the
excellent.
Mexican food is so important right
Oh,
now.
they've got terrible Mexican food in Amsterdam. So bad that some of my Dutch friends and American friends who live there were like, please eat all the Mexican food you can while you're in the States because we really miss it.
Wow. So you live in the Netherlands,
Yes.
but you also started out in Maryland.
Yes, I did.
So how did we go to start out in Maryland, become one of the most famous women in cybersecurity, to living in the
Famous
Netherlands?
people in cybersecurity.
Well, we're gonna I actually this is a setup. This is a setup because we are going to talk about sex and cyber here
All right,
pretty
yeah,
soon,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Sex and cyber.
Well, that's a different show. That's the
If
after
only,
hours.
yeah.
Yes, yes. So please tell us about yourself.
Well, I grew up between Washington, D.C. and Laurel, Maryland. My grandparents were involved with NASA, even when it first started. So my grandmother was the head of NASA's secretary, and her husband headed the materials division. So it was very exciting times, and loved to hang out at Goddard Space Center. Used to want to be an astronaut, but then I picked computers because I absolutely fell in love with it. And I eventually made my way after the military to Europe. I was getting a bit burnt out, working to death. My final straw was there was a email exchange server failure, and I'd already been up 28 hours at that point working, and I fell asleep and woke myself up hitting my head in the server closet on the monitor. So I had heard that Northern Europe had a lot of opportunities for the ladies and the men, and this thing called work-life balance that I'd never experienced before. So I thought, why not give it a try? And they were very happy for me to come over because they didn't really have the specialty that I happen to operate in. And I got a job on the first interview and have been enjoying it, but missing Mexican food since.
Well, that's amazing, but I think we got to go in a little bit more detail. You weren't just in the military; you were in the premier flying service, were you not?
Yes, I was. I was known in layman's term as a human calculator, making sure that a plane can actually take off and land safely. Also, the ground commander of that aircraft. So in the air, the pilot has it. On the ground, the loadmaster has it. And fun tip, at least on the C-5, you might have a crew of 13 to 21, but only 3 people get a gun. And there's only 3 parachutes, and 2 of those guns go to a loadmaster. So guess who is getting a parachute? I am. So that was a great job.
Wow. When you started that, I thought she was going to say Coast Guard, but
Yes, yes. No, I knew where I was going with that. And then that's not all you did in the Air Force. You also went to Space Command,
Yes.
which is a predecessor of Space Force.
Space Force.
Yes.
Yes. No, I had a lot of fun there too. I was involved in command and control systems and also keeping our space assets safe and the telemetry data safe as well, and working with different agencies. So it was a lot of fun. Got my hands dirty on a lot of really burgeoning technology, like the first tech that was encrypting traffic on networks back in the day. So there was always something going on. It was great. Plus, I got to wear from my green flight suit to a blue-looking flight suit, and worked with a space operations center instead of your security operations center that we're so used to.
so how did your parents say, okay, you kind of got into NASA? Kind of a roundabout way to get there.
In a roundabout way, yeah.
So going to the Netherlands, was that Unisys or was that Aramco? What
That was Unisys.
did you do at Unisys?
Well, for part of my job, I helped write different types of machine learning and natural language processing algorithms to do predictive analysis on cyber attacks. So we could try to chart them up to 2.5 weeks beforehand about what was going to happen. Then I also was the global client security analyst that would handle all of our flagship clients, like Danone and their manufacturing facilities around the world, Lloyd's TSB, market trading, dealings with some of the London Stock Exchange. And so I worked between Amsterdam, London, and Paris, like a triangle of constant travel, sleep on airplanes. Yes.
It was airplanes, not trains?
Well, it at the time, a train didn't go from Amsterdam all the way to London very efficiently. So I would have to take a plane. And then if it was only to Paris, I would then just take a train. It was much nicer.
Yeah.
Lots of leg room.
And again, just going through your LinkedIn profile, from there you went to Aramco.
Yes.
And that's like the holy grail of one of the companies you want to work at with cybersecurity, because they're constantly attacked. Like, not only is the energy sector, but you're in the Middle East. You've got a lot of countries that don't like that kind of stuff. So how do you end up at Aramco?
Well, I was coming back from Tanzania for vacation, and I was in Istanbul, and my phone rang, and it was in roaming, and I typically don't answer my phone in roaming since, it's a bit expensive. But I was in a good mood, had a few drinks on the plane perhaps, and answered the phone, and a guy said, hey, we're Ramco, and we would like you to work for us. We need some help. And I was like, oh, okay. Is this a scam call? And so we talked for a bit, and he goes, listen, just tell me your price. Picked a number out of the air, and he goes, listen, we'll get back to you. Okay. So I thought that was a strange phone call. And then shortly thereafter, within a few days, the same guy calls, and he goes, by the way, we've convened the board, and we have matched your price and given you 20% more. And that's when I realized, firstly, that was probably the most powerful board in the world for the most valuable company at the time. And secondly, I did have to ask him, you do know I'm a lady, Chris, right? And he goes, yes, we want you. Okay.
Yeah, that would have been awkward.
Yeah.
It's funny because we think about how politically correct we are here in the United States, yet doing business in the Middle East. We'll talk about this a bit more. So what was it like working at Aramco then?
Man, it was high stress, good and bad.
Is the underlying thing, right? But bump. Right.
The very first week that I was officially an employee, before that I had to take back our Twitter account from the Jester and things like that. Fun times all the way around. But within 4 days of me stepping foot into the office as an actual employee, I had to send one of my team members to handle a nuclear event and contact some friends from the U.S. government to figure out a plan. So that was, I started work on Friday, and that was on Thursday of the next week.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, way to get your feet wet.
This sounds like a plot from MacGyver. So a nuclear event.
Yes.
That's great.
So Aramco does a lot of joint ventures, and sometimes, you can be part of an attack and be pivoted off of, and you don't realize to get to something that somebody really wants to get to.
So it's interesting because in some levels, the patterns of doing cybersecurity stuff is the same no matter where you are. You got your sensors, you got your data. It's never a clear-cut case. You're always investigating. There's never enough time or whatever, right? But when Aramco gets attacked, it's a nation-state event, right? Because they are a critical infrastructure. They support so many different things. So did you guys have any extra resources compared to other companies?
Oh, absolutely, because we had lots of money.
Yep.
So if we didn't have the in-house resources, we could just call, and we would have all the resources we needed within 24 hours. The Saudi government would work with us to get visas as required. And it was a unique company. It still is, because you've got the geopolitics, plus you've got the physical threat. So there's rocket launchers at some of the Aramco compounds in Saudi because they've been physically attacked before. We've had assassination attempts on some of the board members in the past. So you've got the physical threat, the cyber threat as well. So it's very unique.
So for the Great Shave, where we, for charity, we shaved Bryson Bort. He dressed up in different costumes. One of the costumes, they were all things for illustrating points in cyber. He dressed up as Sir Cyber Longbottom.
No, Oh,
Something
goodness.
along
Something
those lines.
cyber
But
bottom.
Lord
Mr.
Cyberbot.
Lord
Yeah.
Cyberbot.
But the point is that, even companies who have the embarrassment of riches, who can buy one of everything, they still get hacked. It still takes policy. It still takes, top down stuff. So what were some of the stuff that you had to ask for that wasn't being done
Well,
without throwing the best energy company under the bus
no,
out
no,
there?
no. Basically, when the big attack happened in 2012, they really didn't think that they would be a target. So they were doing things like, I don't know, you could reset your domain admin account over HTTP inside the network. So there was no real encryption. But they didn't see the risk, and they didn't have anybody or a good team that actually could communicate the risk to the executives.
Wasn't
And
it a little dangerous to communicate the risk at times?
maybe.
I don't know. That kind of popped in my head. No, everything's great.
Everything's great, right? And after the attack and them having to go basically to zero with no computers, fish typewriters out of storage, use fax machines. They had just gotten rid of a lot of their fax machines, pencil and paper. The fact that refined gasoline couldn't move around the country for a 2.5 week time period. And so you would pull up to a gas station and there was no gas. When you have to go all the way back to nothing, then suddenly that shock of we can't do this again. And so they were extremely receptive in setting up lots of different things. So I was very lucky in that respect.
When I first got into cybersecurity, it wasn't even called cyber, but I read this book called Computer Risks, where it just talks about the dependencies that a lot of times people have, we have two connections going into the data center, but they're going through one physical pipe, right? That's still a dependency, right? So was there things that worked that you were surprised that still worked after this attack? And were there things that didn't work that you were surprised? Like what was dependent upon the computers that, without going into classified or Ramco, you shouldn't be saying this kind of that, but like, did the toilet still flush, for example?
Oh, the pencil and paper still worked.
Yeah.
The pencil and paper still worked. Some of the mobile communications didn't because Saudi Aramco actually provided 2/3 of the mobile communications in Saudi Arabia. So when they disconnected from the internet, it cut that off, as well as they provided all the internet to hospitals, police stations, schools.
Oh, my.
So internet was down for much of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it was far beyond your typical cyber attack. There were also things that did work. Luckily, they were able to, through inshallah, through the grace of God, able to preserve the majority of their production without it being affected. Because if that had occurred, we were looking at about $400 to $450 a barrel in gasoline.
Oh, wow.
Or in oil.
And a typical American company, if you went in and just totally bricked it and took away internet, there's going to be this like social reaction, right? People are going to freak out and stuff like that. What was the reaction in the Middle East? What was the reaction in Saudi?
Well, in Saudi, things were kept calm. Certain pieces of information were given out about the attack, so people were rather patient. Most of the time, that's how Saudi Arabia is, most of the time. However, when a variant of the same malware moved over to Qatar less than 3 weeks later, they were missing the burning American flag. Aramco had that variant. Ooh, such fun. Yeah. Things got a little bit more hectic, and Bahrain ended up being affected as well because most of their refined petroleum is actually provided by Saudi Arabia. Luckily, they were able to at least get back up online, but then some things that weren't really reported in the news was the same attackers kept finding a way in. So they had, with money, put up a bunch of security appliances. Then there was another message on Pastebin that said, hey, we see this FireEye device, this Cisco device. Did you know you kept, all the default passwords?
Oh.
And by the way, here's the new password for your CEO. Hugs the internet.
Wow.
Gotta like that.
Yes.
Gotta like that.
Wow.
What was some of the fiction? Like, was there part of the stories that were absolutely false that you wanted to say that never happened?
Yes, there had been a rumor that it was done by a hacktivist group. That was not the case whatsoever. We found that they had been in since probably mid to late April in 2012 and been surveilling, collecting credentials and so forth, finding their way in and out of the network and setting almost every single Windows-based device, including servers, with this logic bomb set to go off all at the same time. Only in Saudi Arabia, though, not the rest of the international offices.
Oh, wow.
And how do you feel about attribution as far as just, it's been called that Iran did this, but who in Iran and whatnot. And I always talk about how a lot of times governments are the ones that can do attribution the best, right? They've got informants walking into their embassies. They have overhead satellites. They've got, all sorts of stuff like that. Whereas most civilian commercial agencies have got, IOCs. And yeah, that IP just came from Russia, so it must be Russia, right? So usually there's somewhere in the middle there. You start talking about these companies like Aramco. They do have connections to the Saudi government. Saudi government does have connections to the West.
Yes.
So how do you guys feel about, well, at the time, how did you feel about attribution?
Well, I think it was correct to attribute to Iran. Part of the code that was used with Shamoon was actually taken from the earlier version of Flame, which was used against the Iranians. So they popped in that piece of code to give a big
Yeah.
just to make themselves known.
For those listening to the podcast and not watching the show, we just won't comment what Chris just did.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So it was a hand gesture. We'll call it.
so that's really cool. We can probably come back to that because we're going to talk about the Middle East Institute, Middle East in general. But all of this led you to the culmination of your cyber career. You won the Wonder Woman Hacker of the Year award. So congratulations. I think Wonder Woman is good. So my only question is, after you saw the 1984 Wonder Woman, did you give the award back?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
I have not watched the movie on purpose.
Don't.
Because, yes, as Cyndi says, everybody's told me not to watch the movie. So I don't want to cry. I don't like to cry.
I feel like if you're going to participate in a universe building, you got to watch all the movies. So it's there. Snyder Cut's much better. So it's good. So again, all this stuff not only led you to get the Wonder Woman award, but it also made you a very sought after public speaker at cybersecurity conferences.
Yes.
So how many conferences have you spoke at?
Ooh, probably about 150 or so.
What's your favorite one?
Yeah, I was gonna.
Ooh.
Or which ones do you like better than the others?
I do like the B-side series. Then there's this great little one called Balkan in Serbia, Novi Sad, where they've got the shitty robot contest where you can build a shitty robot from all these spare parts.
Is that kind of like Schmitty robots?
Schmitty robots.
Just
Schmitty
kidding.
robot.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I do sometimes like the smaller.
Sweaty robot.
There you go.
Yes, for Schmitty tabs.
Yes,
so I was
that's
actually
good.
going
Oh,
with
that,
Schmitty.
very good. Very good. I think the translators or the transcribers going to have a lot of fun with those words right there.
But yeah, I mean, there's I do like some of the more small community where you can be honest, and of course there's the big ones that I do. But some of those, warm and cuddly kind of conferences, I do really like.
How do the big ones compare? So if you talk about like RSA, for example, or Black Hat, we've got the Vegas event, we got the San Francisco event, but have you done like Black Hat Asia? Have you done, the other RSA conferences? How do they compare? What do you think of those?
Well, I did do Black Hat London last year discussing some of the stuff that I was involved in with Boeing, and it didn't compare at all to, or not last year, but the year before. You lose a year with
Yes,
COVID.
I know. It's the COVID year.
Yeah, but it didn't compare really to Black Hat in Las Vegas at all.
Do you think because more of the attention, more of the information that's out there, more of the better questions, more like why? Where do you think that they differ?
Well, I think the setting of London during the day, it made it very reserved. If they had held it at night, British people like to get drunk, but during the day it was very much reserved, and so it was not quite the same.
So from a standpoint, maybe asking a different question, when cons like that get together, it is the honesty, it is the rawness of the conversation and not necessarily holding back, because a lot of times in our industry it's hush hush, mom, don't talk about the thing that actually happened, make it seem like everything's okay and make things go away. So I mean, do you think there's certain cons that are a lot more, I guess, trying to dig into that rawness?
Well, I think so. And I like those particular conferences a lot, because how do you learn how to protect your organization if you don't actually know what has happened from those lessons learned from those raw conversations? What you see in the news is maybe mostly accurate and only a tiny bit of information, like a trickle.
Yeah.
How did COVID change the conferencing for you this past, I guess, 12, 14 months or so?
Well, other than a few in-person events being canceled, I have actually done more conferences because I don't have to travel as much. So it's worked out rather well.
How do you feel about not seeing the audience and, not being able to go into a room, look into that audience and knowing if you're connecting with them, knowing if they want more, if you should be finishing up, how do you handle that?
Well, two ways. If they have some sort of chat feature, especially on Discord or something like that, you can see some of the reactions. And secondly, to have that other person in the room, fortunately or fortunately, I live alone. I sleep with a plush Albert Einstein, and I put him in front of me, in front of the camera, so that I have that audience. And he always loves me.
Always, always.
yes.
He's
He
not.
keeps
He's not a
smiling.
tough critic.
Nope, nope, always smiling.
So before we got to COVID, were you seeing trends? Like one of the trends I like to ask people, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusivity here in a minute, but have you seen more women at conferences, more minorities?
Yes, especially depending on where you are geographically. So, in parts of Central and Eastern Europe, there is a huge showing of women because there's about equal amounts between men and women in technology sectors. In parts of the Middle East, you'll actually see more women, just not so much in pictures, depending on the country. Well, in Europe, I've seen quite a few more women than I have seen in some of the US conferences. And also it depends on the area. So if I'm in the middle, kind of in the middle of nowhere, I see many more men. If I'm nearer bigger cities, I see many more women.
And what are the conferences in the Middle East like? Do they have them? Are they as big as the maybe European or US conferences?
Oh, yes. I'm actually going to be speaking at jaisac for two talks, one on the Saudi stage and one doing a fireside chat with Victor Havers. He's the gentleman that was able to password guess into Donald Trump's Twitter account. And also in 2016, they used the leaked LinkedIn credentials and reused those to get into Mr. Trump's 2016 Twitter account.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, it's a Saudi stage. Is this a government conference?
Yep, it's going to be in Dubai. It's put on by the Minister of Information Technology. And yeah, it's huge. It's the biggest cybersecurity conference in the Middle East. So they'll have probably about 15,000 attendees, just very segmented off because of COVID. It's just more, say, high-ish level, not so much rawness, but Victor and I should have a very fun conversation about it all.
I can imagine. Oh my, yes. Yeah, it is interesting because I guess I'm just used to conferences in this country and I can imagine what they're like in Europe, but going to the Middle East in a conference with the mindset I have with respect to collaborating. I mean, sometimes in the states don't like to collaborate with each other. So I can't even, that must be pretty much of a very big, heavy conference. Wow.
When I was CEO of Tenable, I spoke a lot internationally, but you're speaking as a vendor at that point. So you're kind of speaking as a cyber expert. And I think you've also recruited some U.S. people to speak overseas. Is it harder? Well, I know with COVID it doesn't happen, but before COVID, were you able to recruit people to come speak in Europe and other places?
Absolutely. And I love to do that because let's say I can't do a particular conference or the topic isn't really up my alley. So I try to lift people up and get them to go ahead and start public speaking or continue public speaking because that helps with communication, raises their profile, and I can't do everything and I don't know everything. So, hey, friend, come on over for a free trip to Dubai.
Friend, well said. All right. What are some talks that you want to give, but you haven't been asked to give yet? Like what's a talk you would love to give, but you just haven't been asked to give a talk on that topic yet?
So there's one particular circumstance or issue that has upset me over the years. And one of them is how certain types of technology have been used to profile individuals in Russia and especially in Chechnya. And in these particular cases, the police can then profile LGBTQ or basically anybody they don't like. And they built concentration camps. And people have disappeared or other bad things. And I love technology, but I hate it when it's used to kill people. And I would love to give that talk. However, anyone who speaks out against the Chechnyan government sometimes gets killed.
And then even just across the world, it might just not be Chechnya. It could be Middle East. I imagine they've got things they don't want you to talk about.
The Iranians are particularly angry with me right now.
Yes.
Now, how about the opposite of that? What are talks people have asked you to give that you can't give?
Well, there have been some requests for more confidential and private information about some of the things that happened with Space Command back in the day, some of the things that happened with Aramco, and a few other events and incidents where I've been involved with the U.S. or other governments or Europol, which I can't give.
But have you been asked to
Yes.
give those things? I always wonder sometimes when people are, if they know enough to ask, I'm like, all right, are they really like foreign intel? Are they really just like, maybe they're trying to write the next Kim Zetter book? I mean, it's that type of thing. How often are you asked and they say, Chris, we want you to be on this panel. You're an expert in all these things. You have so much to share. And you're a woman. And it's so great that we can have some diversity finally, right? How often do you get, are you guys in that situation? I say you because it happens to Cyndi too.
Too often. It's one of those things where I like to be looked at as a person in tech who just happens to be a woman. And I'm quite frankly tired of a question, what's it like to be a woman in tech? Well, what's it like to be a dude in tech? Come on. You're in tech. And some of the oddball questions related to that, like how do you handle some of the medical issues women have? Yeah, I've been asked that one before.
Good thing I haven't.
I wanted to punch him. Anyway, sometimes people just don't know any better, and sometimes people view you first as a woman, secondly maybe as a tech, and that's not the way I want to be viewed.
And, we are filming this in 2021. And I'm sure if we watch this 10 years from now, we're going to have an even different lens to look at race and color and sex and whatnot. But right now, as far as today goes, around the world, are you getting, like, what are some of the non-surprising stereotypical, gee, you're a woman in cyber? Is it any different in other countries?
It is. In some countries, but not in all countries. I still run into this type of thing around the world, depending on the country. Like I was asked to be on a women's panel at the last minute during a Bulgarian conference, and there was one guy on the panel, the rest were women, and he happened to say, well, my little girl wants to be a princess. She's never going to be in cyber. And I was the last person on the panel. And I said, I was preteen Maryland, and I still got into cyber. So what's your point? If, kids wanted to do what they did, as a child, as an adult, then we'd all be fire people, police people.
Eating mud pies.
And astronauts. Right?
Yes.
I'm going to be an astronaut fireman, right?
Yeah, the thing I get is a lot, it annoyed me until I realized people listen and they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Like, and to that, it's one of those things, just, I don't know your experience. I just did everything that I did. I'm an engineer. I'm youngest of 8. I mean, I've commonly said the best way to get me to do something is tell me I can't, but I was never told I couldn't do anything. I just did anyway. So, but having people come up later and say, yeah, no, that makes sense. Then that's helpful. But at the same time, I do hope that at some point we are not searching that.
Why do you think there aren't more women in cyber?
Well, I know that there can be some social issues, especially in the Western world, where it seems to be a competition between the genders when it should not be. And that's still a bit disturbing. There's a lot of trolls, both online and in real life, and some fundamental misunderstandings about the different genders. A woman can do anything she is capable of doing, the same as a man. And we just need to get that in our heads. By contrast, the largest percentage of participation of women in tech is actually in the Middle East. 90% of the computer programmers in Saudi are women.
And again, is it because there's a vacuum of anything else that they can do or that they would want to do? And so this is something that is kind of allowed. So that vacuum is there. Therefore, the women fall into that vacuum that is allowed, as compared to like in this country. A lot of times, I feel one of the reasons is because we don't answer the why. Why do we need to do this? If you wanted to be an astronaut, the answer is pretty easy. Why? Because I want to be in space. I want to do that. But when you say, why do you want to be in cyber? Well, what does that even mean?
Well, to me, I see it as kind of that fifth type of warfare. We are in the defense right now. And I kind of view it as the Rosie the Riveter moment when women were asked to start building munitions and take over in the factory floors because there were not enough men. And we have, staffing shortages, skill shortages, and there are so many opportunities from different backgrounds. You don't have to be a pure mathematician or computer scientist to be in cyber. You can be from many different walks of life. And it's that moment where we have to recognize that we are in constant defense mode and we all need to step up and be Rosie the Riveter, Rosie the Cyber Riveter.
Is cyber the right word?
I don't know. It's become from a take a drink word to, fully accepted in the tech world to constantly use. I prefer just speaking about digital because we're actually talking about digital technologies.
So we're obviously trying to push that time in the show. We're going to talk about data care.
I need a drink now.
Yeah, drink. All right, drinking water, not anything else here. Jeff Mann rated bourbon. How come we never gave you, wow.
Well, we have margaritas waiting.
Margaritas are coming. So what do you think about Cyndi's idea to kind of push data care as a way to expand cybersecurity and be more inclusive, both to new people wanting to join this career field, but also kind of raising personal responsibility in people who are not in this industry?
Well, I love the idea because it changes it from something that seems a bit too far away that you can't quite do if you don't have this type of skill or this type of education, to something that everyone can do and everyone's responsible for. And I find that too often within organizations or even a regular person who is non-tech thinks that security is someone else's job. Oh, it's, Apple's job to update my phone. I don't need a strong password. Doopy doopy doo. And that's not the case. So I really love the idea of data care.
Oh, that's great. It answers the question why. And the general public, I love to ask, is Amazon a cyber company?
I would say it is a massive information company.
Right, or a platform. But where do people go on Cyber Monday? They go to Amazon. So the general public clearly sees Amazon as cyber in some way. And so how do we break through that? And that's where I really thought getting to the personal data. Do you have data that you want to protect? And then you're answering the why. Why do you want to protect it? Because it's your data. You want privacy. You want it protected. And then people step up and say, okay, what can I do? And I think as an industry, we're still grappling with communicating to the public in a way saying, this are the little steps that you can do that will help us all.
Yeah, especially when we talk about Amazon, where, who do you want to know that you bought a Sexy Time toy on Cyber Monday from Amazon? How many different places and organizations is that information being sold to? So it becomes personal, right?
Yes, the show just got very personal. So, what's the youngest crowd you've ever spoken to? We're going to go right from sexy toys to what's the youngest age you've ever taught cybersecurity? Have you gone into high schools? Have you gone into middle school? How young's too young to teach people about cybersecurity?
Well, I have spoken to, let's see, what is grade 7 and 8?
Middle school.
Middle school. So I've spoken to middle schoolers over in the United Kingdom about this because they use a lot of technology. That's about the time when they're starting to perhaps get their first smartphone, depending on what their family thinks. They're having to use computers for assignments. Used to be you only had the library computers to use. Now you have to, you got to have something at home. And what to do with that. Safe places to go. Who to contact if someone is DMing you for or, inappropriate information. And so it's important to start getting them to understand, just like we teach our children, don't talk to strangers, don't talk to strangers online, right? Be aware of your surroundings, try to keep safe, but yet more and more of our lives are now digitized, and we need to be able to do that even younger.
What would you have them teach in schools? Like when we went through school, we learned how credit cards worked, how to bake a cake, what the bank's role
Balance your
was,
budget.
life insurance and stuff like that. I don't think they teach enough about how the internet works, how social media. But what would you teach? What would you want everybody to know?
Well, depending on the age, I would want them to know very basic things such as passwords, why some of the information is relevant to keep safe, and who to contact. And then build up from there as they start to learn how do credit cards work and why should you always have like a lock symbol or encryption before you put in a credit card. So apply those different things. If you are looking for a recipe to bake a cake, don't go to dodgyrecipes.com with no encryption. And if there's a malware warning, don't click accept that risk. So move along the education, because we're going to become even more digitized within the next 10 years and 20 years and on.
I think the youngest class I ever spoke with, and this was over Zoom, was fourth graders. I had to give a presentation to 300 fourth graders on cybersecurity. And I did the basic confidentiality, integrity, and availability and that kind of stuff. Just boring, but you have examples and, you try to make it relevant. But I also had fun going into school one time in person. I had everybody write down their password. And then I just read the password and all the kids would point to each other. Oh, that's Sally's passwords. That's Larry's password, that kind of thing. And that was a good way to teach that. I enjoyed that. That's good stuff.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that is being missed is security's not free.
No.
And I think that's one thing that kids are getting access to if their parents are buying them their phone and they're downloading free apps. And everything is free. Why should security be free? Why would I have to pay for a password manager? Why do I? And I think as an industry, again, we're not utilizing the right language or the right examples to help people understand that, no, it's not a luxury. It is a necessity. And you need to pay for security. And somebody's out there creating these things. And working hard to make sure that you're secure. However, you do have a responsibility to play in that too.
Absolutely.
But it would be nice if things were secure by design.
Shh. Then we wouldn't have a skills shortage. I could retire. We could all retire.
Yes, well, then let's hope for the day. Let's hope for the day.
So let's talk about worldwide incident response, because you've done incident response for companies as a consultant all over the world. So what hits the fan, there's an incident. What are some of the cultural responses that you see different, from countries, cultures, that sort of thing?
Well, I found North America is a bit more unique, where they're willing to listen and put resources behind immediately, because the North American mindset understands crisis, not just a cyber event, but crisis in and of itself. There are other cultures like the Middle East. It can be a bit more challenging because not everyone wants to make a decision as quickly as possible, because if they're held accountable, well, that's all I'll say, depending on the country. Then there are other areas where it's really challenging, such as when I've had to do work in Japan. And the business culture there, they're so used to using their people, their companies, and if they don't have that expertise, it's really difficult to go, listen, actually, we need this group of experts who can be here within 24 hours. They know all this. Well, but, we want to use, our people, but you don't have the capability to use those people. And you end up going around and around and around until, you want to ugly cry, and then you just eat lots of dessert.
French pastries in Japan, I hear, are awesome. So yes.
In the U.S., I think every incident responder I've talked to has a story where they've actually done the incident response. They've got the evidence. They're presenting the evidence, and they're at that meeting, And the CEO of the company is like, okay, you guys can leave. Thanks. We're not going to prosecute. We're good. Long as we've contained the damage, we're good. We're not going to go get the bad guy. Does that happen internationally as well?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, wow. Boy, oh boy, because they think that if they can isolate the information, then, nobody needs to know. But the problem with that is, in some countries, if it involves different types of information that has been breached, then that is very illegal. And they can get fined a lot of money, or even criminally as well. Like the UK changed some of their laws where you can now prosecute criminally for certain things like this. So if it gets to that point, and I figure it's a legal matter and I'm not going to get in trouble, I will put on paper that this, as far as I'm aware, is breaking, this law or this regulation, and that I do not agree at all, and that this letter will be given to my attorney and to the appropriate law enforcement or regulatory agencies, because I like to cover my behind.
Yeah.
And I don't want any part of some dodgy stuff.
I mean, do certain words like indemnification and lawsuit translate culture to culture?
Well, yeah. But I mean, it can be very sticky. And also, I found that sometimes those CEOs don't speak to the appropriate type of lawyer or attorney who actually knows how to handle this type of thing. Because some, if they actually did, the lawyer would be like, "What? What are you doing?" So I also commonly will advise in those situations to speak to an appropriate attorney. So.
Now that's really interesting, because I guess it just popped in my mind that we even say there's not common language in cyber in this country, and we speak the same language, and generally culturally the same. I can imagine that must be so interesting. Like how have you run into questions or comments with respect to really not using the same language?
Yes, that can be problematic, especially since the word security and its different forms in most other languages, like European languages, it actually means physical security and any other type of security. So there's no differentiation between how we see that word in the English language. So that can cause some confusion.
Yeah, it was funny because you, like I said, you were just saying it. I'm like, yeah, you are talking in different languages about different languages in different languages. So
Does a basic word like privacy mean different things, culture to culture, country to country?
Oh, yes. Privacy means nothing in Japan. Privacy means everything in most of Europe, especially Germany. The Japanese just don't have a privacy culture, so it goes from one extreme to another. And it can sometimes be very difficult to get some people to understand that privacy also involves security in many ways.
And then doing incident response. So you roll into a company and you're going to get logs, packets, memory images, executables, whatever. How does something like GDPR, or just these concepts of privacy and trust, make like, hey, you can do it, but you have to burn your laptop before you leave? You're like, what do you have to do above and beyond?
Ooh, yeah, it can be a bit complicated because some countries have even stricter regulations than the EU GDPR, such as Germany, where if you're looking at logs, it can't have the full employee's name. So you're like, oh, so you're giving me, I don't know, Audrey.s. And then there's, I don't know, 50 different employees with an Audrey.s if it's a very common name. And how am I supposed to, group this, match this up and whatever? Do you have any older logs? No, we only keep logs for 6 months because of our regulations. You're like, but how often do we have attackers in a network for longer than 6 months before they're detected? Even organizations such as the European Commission have difficulties with this. So they've had to find workarounds, at least if you work for the government. But if you're a regular private organization, you don't get those workaround exemptions.
wow. Do you see a Geneva Convention-esque type thing for cyber ever working?
Cyber norms.
Well, I said ever working. I mean, it could be written, but again, if my word privacy means something different to everybody, and then you have to define it for everybody, I mean,
Well, I don't really see that the United Nations is going to be able to get the majority of countries to agree to the same sort of gonna have to drink every time I say it, to cyber ethics and cyber norms, because different countries, regions, and cultures have these differences of ethics. I do believe, though, we could achieve a lot of that by looking at the regional level. So recently, we were asked to write the cyber addendum to the Abraham Peace Accords for the Middle East, so the first, regional cyber peace accord, and so it's getting a lot of traction in the region because they have a lot of the same goals, some shared culture. It is to their benefit that their digital economies do well around, and they also want to do tech transfers. And this type of cyber norm, say on a regional level, can enable a lot of that.
So let's rewind that for a second. So you've got a lot of experience in cyber in the Middle East, Aramco, doing work there. You were asked to join the Middle East Institute, right? So what is that, and what's your role there?
So I am a distinguished chair with.
Is it required to say the British accent when you do that?
I almost thought she was going to say chap, and I was like,
Yeah.
what's the female of chap?
Well, I'm not required to say it with the posh accent, but I feel like it's such a lovely title because the other distinguished chair is Richard Clark. And so he brought me on board to provide more senior leadership for the cyber program.
And for those who don't know who Richard Clark is,
He is Mr. Cyber Warfare. Yes, 3-time Assistant Secretary of State.
and he worked for Clinton. I think he was his official title? Like he wasn't one of the czars, or he was a czar. I forget. It's been so
Yes.
long we've been in cyber.
We changed the language.
He's written a couple books.
Yep.
He's mostly right, which is more than I can say for most of the books on cyber. That's out
very
there.
true.
So,
That's very true.
really, really a fan of what he's doing. So how much cyber stuff are you guys doing at the Middle East Institute?
Well, we're doing a lot. We are looking at cyber crisis, norms, diplomacy. We're also looking at emerging technology, even including space, because new space IoT assets are IoT assets, right? And more of the Middle East beyond UAE wants to get into space for various reasons. Looking at even up to 6G communications, because there's now partnerships between UAE, US, and Japan, and there's actually a 6G space race right now on which type of communications will be used up there and who will control it, because the Chinese have already deployed 6G.
Ron has a word for that. This is officially Ron's word.
Space G.
Love it. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at some of the disinformation tactics that are used, and extremism online with some of the terrorist groups that we all hate, and also the effects of digital and cyber and information on civil societies, including even censorship by some of the regimes, like the Syrian regime.
So here in the States, if you said there was a cyber incident, it's pretty much the Russians, the Chinese, maybe the Iranians, North Koreans. It's the same cast of characters, but when you get down, maybe the occasional e-commerce, cryptoware, right? It's a handful, right? But when you go over to the Middle East and Europe, like every country has like their sworn enemy in cyberspace, whether it's a hacker thing or a culture thing, a religious thing, or a terrorist thing. So like, what's some of the mythos over there? I mean, people are hacking each other all the time. I mean, how do you keep track of it all?
Well, luckily, a lot of the hacking in the Middle East, instead of being more ransomware, it's actually more surveillanceware. And as recently, Moxie Marlinspike has shown us that a lot of this surveillanceware, even the commercial stuff, you can find flaws in and then figure out who's using it and what they've actually collected.
Yeah. You even just pick a pivot point like Israel. Let's just say people who want to hack Israel, like that's a long list that they have to deal with. And the only reason I'm conversant on that is because everybody who leaves Israel and starts a cyber company, they put that on their pitch deck, which is like, oh, we fought these Syrian hackers, we fought these Iranian hackers, we fought this particular terrorist group that I've never heard of, but apparently they do cyber attacks against the state of Israel. What do you think? And this could be a little bit more controversial, but what do you think about companies like Cyberpoint and Dark Matter who, they've been kind of talked about in some of the books out there where these ex-US intelligence officers are basically helping these regimes. 99% of the time, it really seems like they're helping allies of the United States, but more than once or twice, they're kind of having hacker, ex-US intel person on hacking each other and stuff. That's a weird state of affairs.
And good and bad is questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on it because it's something that you have to be very careful with, especially if you leave a particular agency or any agency, that you still. I mean, there's so much money involved in it. It's one of those difficult choices, but it's one of those choices I can more easily make because I don't want to go to jail, and also I don't want my ethics to be affected. I mean, I've been offered some very dodgy yet loads of money offers, and I chose not to accept them.
And it is like Hollywood at that point. Like literally you're working for the government, you come out, you're offered a job as a consultant. Next thing you know, you're hacking the adversaries of the kingdom of one country against the kingdom of another country. And it's just insane that's still going on, which is just amazing.
And I'm sure in some cases, it could be Ender's Gamey as well. You know, you're doing this good, you're doing this, and then you realize, oh my, they turned it against me, or they actually turned it in a negative way without your knowledge. So
Yes, the good and the bad. I mean, it's great. You've got the hottest technology. You don't have to deal with government bureaucracy like you would if you did work for the government. It doesn't take forever to get approval from lawyers. But at the same time, then you can fall into that trap and the golden handcuffs all in one. Never a good scene.
How often have you seen, I'm just going to call generally say Middle East cyber operations target US assets here on sovereign like US soil?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, Syrian Electronic Army that was propped up and fully supported by the Syrian regime, and also later was given basically asylum by the Turkish regime, so that the remaining members launch all of their attacks from Turkey. So I've seen that, and some of those attacks were hitting, Twitter accounts and things, broadcasting there's been a bomb at the White House and Obama has been affected, taking over the Aramco account to try to get oil prices to go way high and affect the markets, and different things like that. I've seen more cyber terrorism being carried out when they can recruit external people from ISIS. Luckily, they did not recruit very good hackers. And I've seen governments, I've seen companies that are really working for the governments, but, quasi separation. I've seen a lot.
does it make you see a rosier picture ahead, or make you sometimes need to really step back and just say, okay, I can't think of that anymore?
Well, I did start homebrewing to take a break, but eventually there will be a point where there's going to have to be more discussions, real discussions on regional norms, more agreements and cyber peace accords type of thing, because we hear about the wild, wild west, right? And it got
That's what the WWW stands for, right? Wild Wild
Wild
West.
Yes. And eventually there had to be law and order. And that's where we're getting into now. And more countries are having mature certs, mature capabilities to deal with different types of cyber criminality. And also more countries either openly or not so openly work with U.S. agencies around the world like the FBI when there's major stuff.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. So we move towards the future, are we moving to more of a dystopian, we have no privacy and things just suck future? Or one that's more optimistic, where we have personal privacy, freedom, transporters, spaceships like Star Trek?
Controlled identity,
Yeah.
protected
So
identity.
Blade Runner or Star Trek? What's the future? Come on.
Well, I think probably a bit of both. Yeah. I mean, aren't we, what year was Blade Runner?
82, 83?
And what year was it meant to be?
Now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we were supposed to have flying cars too, so
Yes.
We're starting to get those.
Wow, we're
Yeah.
getting drones.
Close.
So personal question. Would you ever get chipped? Would you ever get some sort of tracker, do your health, that kind of thing?
I would hesitate unless there is a darn good reason, because I see that a lot of different things can be weaponized or dual use. So it might be a great idea today, but then tomorrow somebody gets a hold of that information. So, yeah.
That's my concern with all the data out there right now. I think the data that's out there right now, 5 years from now, will probably be weaponized against us. And so I like the idea of getting rid of data after 6 months. Like, because the data lake's out there forever, and things get dug up and all that other stuff. We're going to be moving so far and fast. I don't like there not being any type of consideration, regulation, understanding of how long data should really last, and what is the people's responsibility who have my data's responsibility long term. Are those companies still going to be in business 5 years from now, or is that data just going to then get taken over by somebody else who doesn't have, need to have it and has ulterior motives with respect to what to do with it? So now we are getting into cyber fiction.
It's good stuff, though. So what do you like from a science fiction point of view? Do you like movies? Do you like books? Do you like books on cyber? Where do you get some inspiration or entertainment from, besides brewing beer at your house?
I get a bit of a mix of all of it. And although I do fear for the future, because I watched one of the newer Star Trek series, and they had a password on the console panel of 1, 2, 3, 4, and I tweeted about it. Maybe it was up to 6, but that's all it was. And I'm like, no, even in the future, we can't get passwords right.
That was 3-factor authentication. It was the password, the fingerprint, and the thing on the lapel here. I just made that up. But anyway, what else do you like?
I like a particular series. Oh, now I can't remember what it's called. Bryson Bort had turned me onto it, and it was set in near future China, which I really enjoy. Oh, something body.
Three body problem.
Thank you.
Yes.
I got to read the first one. Didn't have a chance to read the other two, but I really like that because I've studied Chinese history, and I learned, but not to fluency, Chinese several years ago.
It's one of my favorite books, and I think it's a cyber book, even though there's not a lot of cyber in it, because there's a lot of information manipulation and deception. And they're working on levels that are way beyond just kind of the average. And I think there's a lot going on with cyber. It's the same way. Like, I never looked at the internet the same way after I read 3-Body Problem. So there's a plug for 3-Body Problem. Netflix is making a series right now. I cannot wait.
There are 3 books.
Yes. And then the first one does actually have a lot of cyber in it, where they're trying to recruit people.
Yep.
And they kind of lose as you get to book 2 and 3. It's not as prominent, but it's pretty good stuff.
But yeah, talk about thinking very far into the future.
Yes,
it's scary. I think that's one of the issues as well, that I think as an industry and a country and a society, that we all need to think further into the future.
Absolutely. I mean, the Chinese look decades and centuries.
Well, where can people find you? Do you have a consulting business? Are you full-time at the Middle East Institute?
So I'm with both. I have a website which has my contact information, hypasec.com, named after Hypatia, or on LinkedIn, or on Twitter, Sec Evangelism, or there is contact details at the Middle East Institute, mei.edu.
And if somebody wants you to come speak at a conference, what do you like? Do you want, if they're asking to come to Australia, do you want travel?
Oh, please, yes.
That's
Australia's
good.
kind of far.
What about your...
Vegemite.
Well, maybe
I'm just kidding.
I love Vegemite.
Oh, okay. See,
It's got a
Vegemite is on
unique-
the list.
It's an acquired taste.
Yes.
And if somebody were going to offer you like a speaker's gift, like bourbon, scotch, all of that, cigars, what's your...
All of that is great. I love all of
Mexican food that
that.
travels
Mexican
well.
food.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Because now we're going to go into the portion of the show where 5 years from now, when they outlaw smoking everywhere, and they ban this show, Cyndi and I both enjoy cigars, and you're a cigar smoker as well,
Yes.
which we're finding more and more women are into that, but that is a unstereotypical thing. So if you have Chris speak at your conference, you can give her a cigar. She'll smoke it. It's great. So,
Absolutely. And if they outlaw it here, there's one country I think where it won't be outlawed, and that's Serbia.
there you go. Very good.
Wow. I guess that's good to know. I need to get up my nerve to go to Serbia, though. There you go.
It's a great little country.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Chris. Anything you want, any parting words, any inspirational words for people wanting to get into the great world of data care and cybersecurity?
Do it. Just do it. You don't need to know everything. You're never going to match 100% a job description. Believe in yourself, and people will believe in you, and just go and enjoy data care and cyber.
Awesome.
Yes, you really don't have to know it all. I learned by osmosis. I didn't learn it, but the community itself is actually one of my favorite parts about being in cyber, because the people are just great.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you very much. This is Ron and Cyndi Gula signing out for another episode of the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.